Guys, it's Max. I'm just going to show you a quick chess game. Um, I hit 2100 on Lichess, but people are saying chess.com is harder. So I've been trying to rank up in Rapid on chess.com. I recently went up about 100 points. Here's a nice game. I've yet to hit 1900, but I'm almost there. Um, Here's a nice attacking game with white, and I want to show you the significance of backwards knight moves in the early middle game and how that makes the big difference. So in this game, I start with e4, and then he plays e5. I play knight f3, and he guards the pawn. Now I could play the Italian game with bishop to c5. I could play Roy Lopez. I mean bishop c4, or I could play Roy Lopez, the Spanish torture, bishop to b5, either attacking the f7 point or trying to undermine the knight's defense of the center. Instead, I could also play d4, which is the Scotch game, and then if he takes with the pawn, I take with the knight, and then we have this knight standoff, or if he takes with the knight, I take, and then um, the queen wins the pawn back. So that's just one way to immediately attack the center. But in this game, I decide to go for c3 with the idea of d4 later, supported by c3. But he correctly plays knight f6, attacking my pawn, which is now difficult to defend because I don't really have time for d4, even though that is what the computer likes, is just to ignore this pawn and play d4 anyways because I already committed c3. But typically when a knight is attacking this pawn like this, you want to defend it with your knight. However, both of my squares are occupied by pawns, so I cannot defend my pawn nicely. One option is to bring the bishop out here, but this blocks the d4 push, which is the whole point of c3. So, but you can, some players do bring out the bishop here, guard this, then slide the bishop back here, and then get d4 in with the bishop guarding that way. But that takes a few moves. Here, I just calmly play d3, saying, "Thank you, you succeeded in stopping me from playing d4. However, I'm just going to play d3, guard my pawn, and then I will develop the knight to defend the pawn. And only then I will play d4 again." So it's kind of like, yes, my whole plan is to play d4, but I don't want to drop e4 in the process. Now, the computer actually likes, if you look at the evaluation and the lines, the computer says the only way to do well for white is d4 and basically just sacrifice the pawn with the idea of maybe you can bring your bishop out and castle, and this knight will be poorly placed here with the king here and a rook here. Sometimes you can sack this pawn. However, this actually, with good play from black, doesn't really go anywhere. So I play d3. So I think it's called the Ponziani. Yeah, the Ponziani opening. It's not that good if black plays it right, but in this position he plays this move and preventing me from pinning his knight. But now I just developed my knight. I'm going to turn off the lines and evaluation. As you can see, I'm not winning yet, but the idea is I'm going to play d4, and I want him to take with the pawn, and then I'm going to put my pawn on d4, and I'll have exchanged my c pawn for his e pawn, and I should have a good center game. So he develops his bishop. I go for d4. Now, as you can see, the pawn is no longer defending this pawn, but I have my knight here, so we're okay. He does not choose to take. He decides to reinforce his point at at e5. Now, in this case, I immediately just attack his knight, saying, "Where are you going to go?" Because the knight cannot hop in here because of my c pawn, and the knight cannot go back here because of his own bishop. It can't go here because of my c pawn, and if it goes here, it's immediately lost to the move b4, which would attack it, and then it has no retreat, and it can't go here because of the knight and the bishop is controlling all this. So he goes all the way back. Now, computer, again, if you turn it on, it actually still thinks black is doing perfectly fine. However, in a practical chess game, when I look at this position, I like white because black's knight is all the way back at the start. I can play moves like c4 and really just reinforce my huge center point on d5. And e4 is sufficiently defended by my knight, and it's not easy for him to attack it more than once. So my plan here is I'm not castling queenside because of this move c3. I don't want that heir in front of my king. I decide I'm just going to castle kingside in this position, so I need to get my bishop out. Now my bishop could go here, or here, or here, but they're all a little bit too passive. I decide to try to take advantage of his knight being back here by immediately checking and trying to trade off the bishops when he blocks. Now his best option here is to actually play the move c6, and then if I take, his knight can actually get back into the game. So I would probably drop back, um, and just kind of claim that the pawn on c6 prevents his knight from developing, and the pawn would be pinned, so there's no danger of him taking here. But anyway, he decides to block with the bishop, and I just take. Normally, I don't trade my bishops off like this, but at least I'm getting one of his. I'm not getting a knight. Now, I do get his knight back into the position, but it's not as good as if he had facilitated the knight on c6, because now the knight is still kind of poorly placed because the only good square it has is here, and that can be taken away by the move b4. He would have a double attack on e4, but I castle, and now my rook is ready to help my vulnerable backward center pawn. So now he castles as well, and we have a pretty even position. However, I would argue that I have everything I want because I'm basically saying I have more space than you, and although we have the same pieces, I'm going to be able to attack your king using this locked center. Something I'm recently learning is that before you start a kingside attack, you want the center to be locked, otherwise they will have ability for counterplay. So here I play rook e1 with the idea of expecting the move knight c5, attacking e4. So I'm overprotecting e4 so that if knight c5, I can play the move b4 without him having the option of winning this pawn. So then he would have just wasted time and gone back. So he doesn't play that. He instead plays this move, c6, and now I just play the best move, c4, saying I'm not impressed by your threat because now if you take, which he does, I will just take back, and now my c3 pawn has become a d pawn, and I still have this central lock on the position. So ever since out of the opening, when I get d4 in such a way that he can't really take, it allows me to get d5, which is protected, and then his knight's all the way back there, and after everything happens, these two pawns are clearly my advantage. It's basically most everything is the same. However, I have a pawn on the 5th rank, and he has not crossed my 50-yard line. That's the big difference. So I'm taking away his knight's ability to use some good squares. So he goes this way. Now, the knight is probably better here. From here, it attacks nothing. The only thing it's attacking is my center pawn, which is protected by a pawn. So really not a huge issue. So white's in the driver's seat here, and there's only one good move in this position, and this is what the video is all about, trying to teach other chess players that when you have succeeded as white, getting a spatial advantage, and black has no threats, no immediate threats, both are covered. Now, the good thing about rook e1 is I have freed up my knight. My knight is worse than his knight if all I'm doing is defending a pawn that he's attacking. But because my rook is developed, it's multi-purpose. On the one hand, I'm defending this so my knight can move, On the other hand, I'm facilitating the perfect move in this position, knight f1. Now, knight f1 is a move that I probably wouldn't have played as an intermediate player. It's only as like an expert that I would make these types of moves. And you see grandmasters making these types of moves. The idea is that my knight on d2 is blocking my own bishop and it's playing a defensive role. I want it to be here. If the knight is here, it would be defended by a pawn, attacking the bishop, threatening a trade. So the queen is tied down to the bishop. And then also, uh, can he play the move g6? No. If my knight is on f5, just magically, if you just get it here, when you're looking at the position, the bishop needs to be improved. It needs to be able to see. And the knight needs to be here, or this knight here. But one of my knights needs to be here. The reason a knight here is so good is because I'm pressuring the king with takes bishop and check, or some sacrifices here, especially combined with the bishop to open up the king. And then also, the beauty of a knight on f5 is if he ever plays g6, I can just take his pawn on h6. So that move h6 earlier in the game that he played is actually a weakness when you have a knight on f5, because then you can't play g6 without giving up the pawn. So I go back. Now it's his turn. He goes back. Now his idea is probably f5 to get the rook in the game, and then maybe hop the knight back behind the pawn. That's kind of his only attacking idea, is to try to undermine my center so that maybe his knight can actually win this pawn. So here I play the move knight e3. The reason I go to e3 is because I kind of want to maintain control of this square, just preventing his knight from coming in some situations. The best move is knight g3, which is what I was going to play, but because his knight is no longer attacking this, when he makes this move, I'm kind of rubbing it in by saying, it doesn't matter if I go to g3 or e3, the point is I'm threatening knight f5, and if you play a move like g6 to prevent knight f5, the bishop is actually winning the pawn on h6 with an attack on the rook. So not easy to prevent it. I decided to jump to e3 instead of g3 because I don't care about disconnecting my rook temporarily, because I know my knight is the piece I'm going to move. So if you notice, from this position, after the pawn structure is clarified, the only piece I'm moving is my knight, because my bishop has long-range pressure, doesn't need to move. My rook is well placed, my queen is well placed, so I can make a bunch of moves in a row with my knight, knowing that that's the piece that needs to glue everything together. So I go back, and then so from here, I could be on g3, but I figured being on e3 is a little more centralized and just gives me a little more flexibility. And so he goes queen to here. Now this is a really weak move. He should be playing rook c8 probably, just to kind of get some counterplay, or maybe even some sort of pawn move, or maybe f5 doesn't work here, but actually computer was saying here best move is g6, preventing knight to f5, and now you see why knight to e3 is an inaccuracy, because it actually does allow g6, because although h6 will be a target, it's not immediately capturable because my knight disconnects my bishop. So the knight should have been on g3, but it's a moot point because after his queen move, I get the knight in, and now I am attacking the bishop, and the bishop is not savable. If you try to save it with, that's probably why he moved his queen to here, is to get the bishop out. He probably saw knight f5 coming, but then here he probably realized if I leave, you're actually dropping d6 with an attack on the queen, and pretty much game over at that point, because then I would have a protected pass pawn here and an active knight, and that's just bad. So here he plays his knight over to help his king, and in this position, it's actually already over for black. If I was a computer, it takes a lot of balls to play this move as a human, but the best move here is actually bishop takes h6, and with the idea of queen d2 following that. So if bishop takes here and pawn simply recaptures, of course I have the threat of knight takes pawn attacking the king, but if you do that, you're trading a bishop for 2 pawns and a check, and that's not necessarily winning. It actually is in this position. It's still like, it's basically still winning for white, but it's not a good move. It's only like +1 instead of like +4 or something. So the best move is actually queen d2, and then black is completely crushed here because there's no way to defend. If the king tries to defend this pawn, the queen crashes through anyway and checkmates on g7. So bishop cannot be taken. And if you try to attack the knight actually can take the bishop with check, and then you can win the rook. And the game's basically over because you've won the exchange, and his king is weak. You've won a pawn plus an exchange, so you're up a full piece, basically. And that's if he plays the best moves. But anyway, I decided to play queen b3 because I'm looking at the quality of my position, and I am full on intent on sacrificing here. But the reason I play the queen out first is because I think my queen wants to be able to slide over. My queen wants to be on the third rank. Also, I have ideas of a5, a4, a5, with the idea of attacking this knight, and the knight has no forward mobility with my queen here, preventing the knight from using this square. And then the knight will have to retreat. It will have to go back, and then I'll win this pawn on b7. So that was, but really my idea is I want the queen on the third rank, because when you do a sacrifice, you have to follow it up with heavy pieces quickly backing up the sacrifice and checkmating the king. Otherwise, you're just down a piece. So I should take the pawn, but I decide to get a little bit ready to swoop in before I do that. So here now, his queen is actually blocking one of the retreating squares. So his only move is knight back. If this knight were to get attacked by my pawn, his only move is going there, which disconnects his rooks, and it can't be good back there. So I play a4. Now again, this is completely unnecessary. White has already won. Just by having my locked center and my knight on f5 that can't be kicked, this bishop move is a knockout punch whenever I want. But first, I don't know that, so just to be sure, I decide to kick this knight. Now, he decides to, part of the reason of queen here is to defend this pawn so that the bishop is free to escape. He doesn't want to lose his bishop to my knight, or have it under pressure. So that's why he's doing that. But that gives me time to attack his knight. Now it looks like my knight has no targets because it's d6 is defended. The bishop is no longer there. And this is defended by a pawn, and it doesn't seem like I have an attack yet. But I'm attacking the knight. The knight has to go to c8. Now this knight, if you'll notice, has just been bullied the whole game because of my opening. It goes back to b8, then it comes out again, and it gets bullied again all the way back to c8. And now this is, I think, a wonderful move. Knight 3 to h4. And the reason this is such a good move is, again, there are no g6 ideas because the knight can hop in with check. And if the king ever tries to attack the knight, well, guess what? It's defended by the bishop. So it's actually not a problem. And then the knight on h6 will be supported by my other knight hopping into f5. So knight h4 is a super strong move because it prepares queen g3, or any of my rooks can now go up and be immediately dangerous. This bishop is threatening to sacrifice as well as the knight. I'm kind of calculating it all, but I'm basically just saying my army, I have won the battle in the center, and my knight has a great outpost with a friend. So if this knight actually comes here and tries to take out my good knight, the other knight will just come in to save the day, and you cannot play g5 to kick my knight because again that drops g um, or that drops h6, and then it would also drop once I win h6, I've undermined the defense of g5, so bishop takes g5 after knight takes h6. So my knight is safe on h4. It is a good move. And now he comes in successfully getting his knight into the game, but on a defensive role. You'll notice all his pieces are in the first three ranks. His bishop is very passive, just trying not to get captured. And my worst piece is my bishop, and because I want my rooks to be ideally connected, and this bishop hasn't moved yet. My rook over here is actually defending the pawn from the bishop, so it's not a terrible rook. And I'm also, computer really likes the ideas of a6, because if he plays b6, this a6 pawn will be a good strength in the endgame. And then also, if he takes, then my rook comes in, and suddenly d6 is dropping. So a6 is a really strong idea here, but I decided I'm ready to sack, so I take the pawn, and I decided to take with the bishop, which is the best move. Now, if I take with the knight, and you imagine he takes back, he calls my bluff, says, I will take it. Well, then there's a pawn here, and I can capture it with the bishop with an attack on his rook. But if the rook slides away, I've basically lost a knight for 2 pawns and a nice bishop position, and this knight is not on f5 anymore because it died on h6. And then this knight cannot actually jump back into f5 and bring the attack, like rage on with the attack, because this knight will actually take my knight. And then I don't want to play the move e takes f5, because then queen takes f5, and I no longer have a strong knight there. So none of that actually really works, as well as just sacking the bishop first, because there's no reason on waiting for him. I mean, one of the reasons I haven't done it yet is because I was thinking queen g3, and then when I take, I'm threatening mate using the bishop. But anyway, right here I decided to take, because if he takes, queen g3 check. There's other ways to win, but queen g3, computer strangely likes queen here, attacking here, but I don't really get that, because why not just check? If you let it think long enough, it likes to check. But I check the king here, and now the king is screwed, because if he dodges the check, I have mate. That's why the knight on f5 is so strong. Because I sacrificed the bishop to open the king, my knight on h4 plays an important role, because it supports the knight on f5, so he can never exchange it without just helping my knight. It's basically like the knight has an extra life, okay, on f5, because my whole position revolves around the control of the middle and this knight on f5. So anyway, his best option is to block with his knight, which I of course saw before queen g3, and you'll notice I have 708. I, in 3 seconds, take this knight. I don't think about it at all, because I've already calculated on my last move his best option. It's mate if he doesn't block, and when he blocks, I just take, because if he takes back, I will simply take with the queen, and then if he tries to block with his queen, I take the queen with checkmate. And if he moves the king into the corner, I actually win this pawn with check. And if he goes back, the rook comes up, either rook. And with my queen on h6 and his king here, and the rooks, one of the rooks here, it's unstoppable checkmate or massive loss of material. So he actually decides to attack my queen. Now, one thing I want to point out is if he takes, which is the best move, and I take, and he goes here, and I take, if he goes here, he loses to rook e3, with the idea of rook g3 check and crushing. For example, in this position, what can black play? The threat is imminent, and if you go here, huh, I wonder what the best move is here. I mean, I have check, but if he goes here, check, and he can't go up, so if he blocks with the queen, he loses to that, and if he blocks with this, maybe a move like rook h3. Yeah, and they're saying the best move for black here is to sack your queen for the knight because the knight is so powerful. I wonder if I had rook h3 was the best. Well, anyway, as you can see, he's in trouble. But the best move is actually knight h7. And knight h7 is a problem for white because, ideas like bringing the rook over actually don't really work that well because the queen and the king guard the knight. The knight is an excellent defender of the king, and it also defends the rook. And so the best move for white is actually to call it quits on the attack and just say I won the pawn on d6. And this is a huge pawn to win because after takes, this pawn will not live long, and these pawns are strong, protected, and will become a queen in the endgame. Even though I'm down a minor piece, these pawns and the activity of this knight are a little bit too much, as well as my rooks are going to be a lot quicker because his bishop still hasn't moved. But that's the best way to play for black. But anyway, he doesn't go in for any of that, so he just attacks my queen. And I actually thought for several minutes here, because I know I'm crushing with white here, but it is tricky because my queen is hit. So if I play a knight move, like let's say, it's funny because none of it works for black because this queen is dropping. Even if I drop my queen, if I can get his rook and the queen like this is a discovered check on the king, and I'm attacking the queen. The problem I have to calculate is he can take my queen, which removes the discovered check. So if I take his knight, he takes my knight and he wins. But obviously here I take the queen, and this knight here actually doesn't have a good way to escape. So I could just simply take the rook, but there's also moves to calculate like knight takes here, and also queen g4. Now queen g4 I thought would be met by knight f6, and then I thought, well, if I go back, that's going to be threatening a repetition. But the funny thing is that there's a refutation to knight f6. So knight f6 is actually not the best move for black, but I thought it was threatening a repetition, and I think the reason it doesn't work is, oh yes, okay, I remember. The reason it doesn't work is that the beauty of the knight being here, it no longer guards against mate on g7. So although my queen is under attack, if I make a knight move, it's a discovered attack on the king. But the discovered attacks are not very powerful if his knight can just eliminate the check, because then the discovered attack isn't as strong. In this case, it doesn't matter because I'm winning a rook and a queen, so it doesn't matter. But like if you imagine the rook is over here, and I'm playing a move like that, it's not as strong because I dropped my own queen, and then maybe my knight gets stuck. But anyway, here, the way to win with white is to double check. And now he actually can't take my queen because the queen is attacking the king, but so is the knight. So the only response to a double check, especially from a knight, is to move the king because you cannot block a knight, especially with a queen at the same time. So now the king is forced to h7 or h8, and either one of those is met by queen g7 checkmate. Okay, so he actually, queen g4, in my opinion, is the best move. I didn't see that knight f6 no longer defended g7, so double checkmate. So it's not a repetition. Instead, I just decided, I've been thinking about this too long, I'm just going to check with this knight. The idea of this was if he goes to the side, like this, then I win his rook with check, and this has to be winning for white because I'm also winning the queen. Even if he but if he goes this way, he can't actually because the knight. And if he steps up, which he does, I was actually going to play the move. I was thinking about knight here, check. And the king cannot take my knight because it's guarded by the queen. And wherever the king goes, it's going to be in trouble. Like, I don't know, but I was trying to calculate what if the queen sacrifices herself, and then when I take, he takes, and if I take, and he takes, and suddenly I'm actually not winning. So instead of all that, I just decided I'll take the rook, and now I am two knights are hanging and my queen's hanging, but I'm attacking, it's a check, and I'm attacking his queen. And if he takes my queen, I take his, and then just to show, if he takes my queen, stopping the check, I take his, my knight survives. It looks like it has no escape, but it survives. And because this knight is threatening a check on f5, and if you take the knight, I take yours. Like, basically, I was thinking, well, what if he saves his knight, and then I have two knights kind of in trouble, and what if they both die, and his survives? But I have this move, knight f5, just shuts everything down, because after the check, I'm winning this, which enables the knight to escape that way. So he can't save his knight, is the moral of the story. So he takes mine, and then I take his. Is this what actually happened? No, so he blunders though. So once I take here, threatening his queen, and letting my queen die, he decides to not go in for that variation I just showed, where he takes the queen, because then the knight actually dies, and he can only win one of mine, I think. Or let's show it one more time. So if I take his queen, he can win a knight, but he can't save this one. And now this one takes a bishop move and a rook move, two rook moves to win it. I can always at least take a pawn out and have a protected pass pawn. Plus, I have moves like rook f1 and rook c1, threatening to go on the 7th rank, winning a pawn and protecting my knight. So I'm basically just up a rook here. So he didn't want that, so he took my knight, saving his queen, and just blundering checkmate, because now my queen does not need to die and has this check, and the king only has one square to go to, and then the knight, you'll see, does an excellent job, and it's checkmate because the queen is protected by the knight and completely kills the king, which is blocked in by its own bishop. And you see the other rook actually never got going, which is why Black's army was kind of disjointed and never really got going, whereas White's army, controlled the middle, made it hard for Black to develop, and then had the threat of a rook lift the whole game, which never actually occurred, but it could have occurred. And I think it's a pretty nice game from White. Basically, the idea is if I'm not good enough at chess in this position, so lots of people can get a good center with White. But if I'm not good enough to recognize that the way to win, the way to attack Black and win with this locked center here, with this slight advantage, the way to win is to get one of my knights to here. And some players might go here and try to get in here, and maybe that works, but much, much better is knight f1 here. Let me just show the computer. You'll notice +1 is a backward knight move because the computer realizes that the threat of hopping into f5 with that knight, because the knight on f3 is already good. But this knight on d2 is overprotecting and needs to find a home, and its home is on g3, e3, or f5 from f1. So although it's not good on f1, it's a step on the way to being better. You take one step back, you go from the second rank to the first rank in order to go to the third. Because the knight can't just go here, it has to go back and then here. And you'll see it wants knight g3, and it also likes knight e3, but not as much. And here, the game's just completely over after knight to f5. If you're up 2 pawns in the middle game with this type of a position, you're going to win a lot of the time at this level. And as you can see, one normal-looking move, and Black is completely lost to the move bishop takes h6. And they're saying best move is to get this knight out of f5, ignore the bishop, because if you take the bishop, queen d2 is crushing, and the only way to defend is with your knight, and then I can actually kick the knight, and the knight, it just wants to let die. And as you can see, White's crushing there. So anyway, this knight f1 move is huge because the whole reason White has such a good position here is this knight, and then this knight h4, I do want to see what the computer thinks here. So the computer's already saying bishop takes h6. It's basically just screaming that the whole game, saying that that tactic works. It also likes a6 ideas, given the way I played on the queen side, which was kind of unnecessary. And then the third best move you see is the knight to h4, which is great. Now, some ideas of knight h4 don't work sometimes. If this knight can sacrifice itself for the center, opening up a bishop attack, but it just doesn't work because my rook actually defends the center and would then defend that. And the knight also defends backwards. So anyway, I do finally, it's not that I didn't see it, it's that I just thought he's not going to be able to defend against that, and I'm going to make damn sure that my major pieces are all less than 2 moves away from rocking the boat if I'm going to go down a full bishop in a long time. Like a rapid game is plenty of time to think. So it's a big decision. And then here, maybe a bad player would just take with the knight. But of course, it's stronger to threaten checkmate on g7, forcing his knight here, and then just taking it. And then basically, he's he just scared himself off of f takes g6 because he saw my idea of this, and he didn't want to lose this with check because he probably didn't see knight h7 as a miraculous defense, and he thought that if he goes here, either rook move is just going to be lights out because I don't know. Anytime you have a queen that's that close, it's hard for the king to run away because the knight on f5 is just a beast. It makes the queen way more powerful. Queen takes g6 or queen g6 check. Yeah, it was just like I showed before. Rook h3, and the rook swings around. This rook is pinned, cannot block. The king cannot escape in any direction. The knight is a monster. This knight is worth like 6 points at least. So anyway, it is interesting though looking at if he had played knight, if he had let me take here instead of what he did, which is leaving this knight here, which ultimately was his demise because I'm winning the rook with an attack on the queen, and I ignore his threat because as you can see right here, I'm already doing pretty well. I have an extra rook. So his idea didn't work, but if he was a better player and he had taken here and then found the amazing knight h7, because queen h7 doesn't work because of the rook dropping, but if he finds the amazing knight defending the check and completely neutralizing the queen, basically. The queen can't check. The checkmate doesn't work because the downside of knight f7 is that my queen in that position sees d6. So best move for white here is, I mean, there's h4 ideas. That's pretty complicated for me. I mean, I get that black has no pawns, so the h-pawn becomes an asset, but that's a slow attack. Like if I play h4 here, I'm down a bishop, and see, I'm only up 1.5. So if he starts attacking my queen, I mean queen h5, queen, like threatening a queen trade. I guess I can just take. And what is h5 doing? Nothing. I'm just winning d6. So the whole thing comes down to the fact that after his miraculous knight defense, he's opening up the queen d6, and it is again the knight on the knight on f5 with the pressure on d6 as well as the pressure over here. This knight is way too powerful, and it's protected by a pawn. So any move like rook takes, well, he doesn't have time for that. But basically, I can take this. His queen is hanging. His rook is potentially hanging. He has to take here, and then I take back. Or, I mean, what if he went like here? Rook a3. So yeah, I guess the idea is this king has no shelter. Although he's up a piece, he's up this bishop, the knight is forced to act as a pawn, defending his king from rook h3 ideas. So, and rook g3 ideas. So although he's up a minor piece, he's dropped his center pawn. He's going to drop this with check, potentially. And if he trades queens, this pawn is hanging. This check is on the horizon. And then, again, my rooks are very quick to be felt. And the real truth of the position is that when d6 drops, this pawn is soon going to drop with ideas of knight c4 pressuring this. And, I mean, it's not crushing for white, but it's a pretty easy win just because um, this pawn is going to be impossible to attack, basically. And it's gonna, in the end game, it's gonna quit queen in a few steps, and black has nothing of the sort. Black has 2 pawns at its starting position, and then 1 isolated pawn here, which will be hunted down by the knight if the rook moves, or by knight to c4. So if we look at this position, with black playing all the perfect defenses, that knight on f5 eventually wins a pawn. And although I've sacrificed the bishop, it wants rook b8 here. Okay, so yeah, it has to defend against that. And then, like I said, knight c4. Now this pawn is under attack, and if you play rook e8 defending it, there's moves like f3, and now the king of white is actually threatening to move up the board. And also you have ideas like rook to here, and maybe knight up here again, and I'm not sure. So it's basically just an endgame where white has this killer pawn, and the computer thinks it's pretty good. Not crushing. So black could have tried to play on. But anyway, this is how it went. It went so bad because he didn't want to take my queen, and then it just delivered mate here. And that's also picking up the knight. But that's good night. So thanks for watching. Hope you found it instructive. Peace out.